Victor stood in the center of the marble-floored lobby, his worn apron a stark contrast to the shimmering crystal chandeliers overhead. In his hands, he held a simple, elegant cake box, the culmination of hours of precise labor. He looked down at the two crumpled $100 bills Elena had shoved into his palm and felt the familiar sting of a lesson about to be taught. "Miss Cruz, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Victor said, his voice calm but resonant enough to make a passing waiter pause. "The agreed-upon price for this order, including the rush delivery and the custom Salvatore crest, was $500. You've given me less than half of that." Elena Cruz didn't even look up from her tablet as she adjusted the sleeve of her sharp red blazer. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, old man. It was an evaluation. I've decided your time is worth exactly $200. Frankly, you should be thanking me for the exposure of having your work served at a Salvatore event." "Exposure doesn't pay for flour or the electricity for the ovens," Victor replied, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "If the price is too high for your budget, I'll simply take the cakes back. I have a local orphanage that would appreciate the donation much more than a woman who doesn't respect a contract." At this, Elena finally snapped her head up, her eyes flashing with a cold, performative rage. She stepped into his personal space, her heels clicking aggressively on the stone. "You'll do no such thing. Those cakes are already logged into the event inventory. They belong to this venue now. You, however, do not." A few guests began to linger at the edge of the lobby, whispering as they watched the dominant woman in red tower over the unassuming baker. Victor didn't flinch. He simply tightened his grip on the cake box. "I'm not leaving until the debt is settled, Elena. It's a matter of principle." "Principle?" Elena laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You're a delivery man. You don't have principles. You have a shift." "Marco." Marco Ruiz hurried over, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. He looked at Victor, really looked at him, and saw the steady gaze of a man who wasn't nearly as afraid as he should be. "Yes, ma'am," Marco whispered. "Get this nuisance out of my lobby," Elena hissed, pointing a manicured finger toward the service entrance. "He's making a scene and upsetting the atmosphere. Give him his $200 and show him the door. If he resists, call security and tell them we have an aggressive trespasser." "Sir, please," Marco said, placing a hesitant hand on Victor's arm. "She isn't joking. If you don't leave right now, you're going to get me in really serious trouble. I need this job." Victor looked at the young man, seeing the fear in his eyes, the kind of fear that forced good people to do small, terrible things. "You shouldn't have to sacrifice your dignity to cover for her lack of it, Marco," Victor said softly. "I'm not leaving," Victor repeated, his voice raising just enough to ensure the engineer and the other staff could hear. "Not until the work is paid for in full. $50 per cake, $500 for the set. That was the deal." Elena leaned in close, her voice a low, venomous silk. "You have 5 seconds to disappear, or I will make sure you never sell a crumb in this city again. I have friends in the health department and the police. Choose your next words very carefully." Victor met her gaze with an unnerving stillness. "I've already made my choice, Elena. I wonder if you'll be as certain of yours when the day is over." The air in the manager's office felt thick and suffocating as Elena slammed the door shut, cutting off the muffled sounds of the bustling lobby. She paced the length of the room like a caged predator, her red heels digging into the plush carpet with every sharp turn. Marco stood by the mahogany desk, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to avoid her piercing gaze. He could still see Victor's calm, resolute face in his mind, the face of a man who wouldn't be bullied. "He's still out there, Marco," Elena hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous, low octave. "That old man is a stain on this event. I told you to get him out, and yet he stands there like a monument to my own patience." "He just wants what is fair, Elena," Marco whispered, his voice cracking. "The man worked hard on those cakes. If we just pay him—" "We pay him what I decide," she shrieked, turning on him so quickly he stepped back. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a velvet-lined box. With a flick of her wrist, she revealed a shimmering diamond bracelet that caught the overhead light, casting cold reflections across the room. She held the jewelry toward Marco, her expression twisting into a cruel mask. He wants to play the martyr? Fine. We'll give him a cause worth martyring for. Marco looked at the bracelet and then at Elena, a cold knot of dread forming in his stomach. What are you saying? You are going to take this, she commanded, stepping toward him until the scent of her expensive perfume was overwhelming. You will find a way to distract him. Bump into him. Offer him a peace offering. I don't care how you do it. Just slip this into his apron pocket. You want me to frame him? Marco's breath hitched. Elena, that's a crime. That man hasn't done anything but deliver a cake. Elena leaned over the desk, her eyes narrowing into slits. What he has done is challenge me in front of my staff and my guests. Now listen to me very carefully, Marco. You are an assistant manager, a position hundreds would kill for. You have a mortgage, don't you? A sick mother you're supporting? Marco swallowed hard, his silence confirming her leverage. If that man leaves this building with his reputation intact, you leave this building without a job, she threatened, her voice as sharp as a razor. I will make sure your termination papers cite complicity in theft or gross incompetence. You'll never work in this industry again. She pressed the cold metal of the bracelet into his palm and forced his fingers to close over it. But, she added, her tone suddenly shifting to a sickeningly sweet purr, if you do this, I'll see to it that you're up for that promotion we discussed. There might even be a significant bonus in it for your loyalty. Marco looked down at his clenched fist. The weight of the jewelry felt like a leaden anchor. He thought of Victor's words about dignity and integrity, but the looming shadow of unemployment felt far more immediate and terrifying. Do I have your word, Marco? Elena asked, her hand resting on the door handle. Or should I call security to escort both of you out right now? Marco's shoulders slumped, the light in his eyes fading as he surrendered to the pressure. I'll do it, he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Good, Elena said, a triumphant smirk returning to her face. Now go. Ensure the thief is caught red-handed before the Salvatore guests arrive. I want this handled with maximum drama and minimum delay. As Marco walked out of the office, the bracelet burning a hole in his pocket, he felt as though he had already lost his job and much more besides. He saw Victor standing near the hallway, looking out at the gardens with a peaceful expression that Marco was about to destroy. The trap was set, and the bait was in his hand. Marco stepped back into the hallway, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The diamond bracelet felt heavy in his pocket, a cold weight that seemed to burn through the fabric of his uniform. He looked toward the end of the corridor and saw Victor Salvatore. The older man hadn't moved. He stood with his back to the ornate wallpaper, his hands folded neatly in front of his apron, watching the staff scurry about with an expression of profound, quiet patience. Taking a deep breath, Marco approached him, his eyes darting toward the security cameras and then back to the floor. He didn't look like an assistant manager in that moment. He looked like a drowning man. He stopped just inches from Victor, leaning in close under the guise of an official reprimand. Sir, I'm begging you, Marco whispered, his voice trembling so slightly it was almost a vibration. You have to leave this place right now. Don't go back for the money. Just walk out the front door, and don't look back. Victor turned his head slowly, his gaze steady and unnervingly perceptive. You seem nervous, Marco. Your hands are shaking. I'm trying to save you, Marco hissed, his eyes filling with a desperate moisture. If you stay, something terrible is going to happen. Elena, she isn't just going to let you go. She has a plan to make sure you never walk free again. Please, if you value your life, just go. Victor didn't flinch. Instead, he reached out and placed a firm, grounding hand on Marco's shoulder. If you ever find that you have to betray your own core values just to keep something, young man, it would be much better for you if you simply lost it. Marco felt a sob catch in his throat. You don't understand the world we're in. People like her, they decide who is guilty and who is innocent based on the clothes they wear. You're wearing a baker's apron, and she's wearing a designer suit. No one will listen to you. The truth doesn't change its color based on the wardrobe of the speaker, Victor replied softly. He looked down at Marco's pocket, where the silhouette of the bracelet was visible to those looking closely. What did she tell you to do, Marco? Tell me the truth. Marco let out a shaky breath, his resolve crumbling under Victor's unwavering integrity. She told me to put a bracelet in your pocket. She's going to call security and accuse you of theft. If I don't do it, I'm fired. If I do it, an innocent man goes to jail. Victor went silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the hallway. Instead of the fear Marco expected, a spark of something sharp and tactical appeared in the old man's eyes. Then do it, Victor said. Marco blinked, certain he had misheard.
What?
No, I can't. Do it, Victor insisted, his voice dropping to a low, commanding tone. Put the bracelet in my pocket. Let her see you do it from the corner of her eye. If you want to stop the cycle of people like Elena, you have to let the trap spring. Trust me. I have a plan. This is madness, Marco whispered, his fingers dipping into his pocket to touch the cold metal. You'll be arrested. They'll humiliate you. I've been humiliated by better people than Elena Cruz, Victor said with a faint, enigmatic smile. Go ahead. Follow your orders, Marco. But remember this moment. It's the moment you decide who you really are. With a hand that felt like lead, Marco reached out as if guiding Victor toward the exit. As they passed a large decorative vase, he felt the sickening slide of the jewelry as it dropped into the deep pocket of Victor's apron. He felt a piece of his soul go with it. Very well, Victor said aloud, his voice now clear and formal for any eavesdroppers. If you insist that I wait for the manager in the hall, I shall do so. Marco stepped away, his face pale and his heart heavy. He watched Victor stand tall in the center of the hallway, a lamb waiting for the slaughter. Or perhaps, a lion waiting for the tall grass to move. He turned to see Elena rounding the corner, a triumphant glint in her eyes and a security guard already at her side. The injustice was in motion, and Victor Salvatore had chosen to stand right in its path. Elena did not wait for the dust to settle from Marco's departure. She rounded the corner with a predatory grace, her red blazer appearing like a bloodstain against the sterile white of the corridor. Beside her marched Andre, a stone-faced security guard who kept his hand hovering near his radio. Elena's face was no longer a mask of corporate professionalism, it was a theater of practiced outrage. There. Stop him right there. Elena's voice shattered the quiet of the hallway, a sharp, piercing scream that drew heads from the nearby ballroom. She pointed an accusing finger at Victor, who remained standing exactly where Marco had left him. Don't let him take another step. He's a thief. Andre moved quickly, stepping between Victor and the exit, his shadow looming over the older man. Victor didn't move, nor did he look surprised. He simply held his ground, his hands resting loosely at his sides. Ma'am, please stay back, Andre cautioned, though his eyes were locked on Victor. Stay back? He has my jewelry, Elena cried, her voice rising in pitch for the benefit of the small crowd of staff and early guests now gathering at a distance. She clutched at her bare wrist, her breath coming in shallow, dramatic gasps. My diamond bracelet, the one I took off to check the cake inventory, it's gone. I saw him near my station. I saw him fumbling with his apron. Marco stood in the background, leaning against a pillar, his face ghostly pale. He watched the scene unfold with a hollow feeling in his chest, knowing he was the hand that had loaded the gun Elena was now firing. Sir, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them, Andre commanded, his voice deep and authoritative. This lady is making a very serious accusation. It is only an accusation if there is no evidence, Victor replied, his voice a cool breeze against Elena's fire. And as of now, all I see is a woman who is upset because I asked to be paid for my labor. You dared to steal from me to make up for the difference? Elena shrieked, stepping forward despite the guard's warning. You thought you could just help yourself to my belongings because I wouldn't pay your extortionate prices? Search him, Andre. I saw him put it in his right pocket. Andre looked at Victor with a hint of hesitation. There was something about the old man's composure, a lack of the frantic energy usually found in a caught thief, that gave the guard pause. But the manager's word was law in this building. Is that true, sir? Andre asked. Do you have anything in your pockets that doesn't belong to you? Not that I am aware of, Victor said, his eyes shifting briefly to Elena, who who was practically vibrating with malicious anticipation. "But if the lady is so certain, I invite you to proceed with your investigation. Though I must warn you, once you start down this path, there is no turning back from the consequences. Don't listen to his threats. He's trying to intimidate you," Elena barked. "Search him now." Andre reached out, his movements firm but professional. He patted down the heavy canvas of the apron, and his hand stopped abruptly over the right pocket. He felt the unmistakable shape of cold, hard metal and delicate stones. Elena's eyes lit up with a terrifying triumph. Slowly, Andre reached into the pocket and pulled out the shimmering diamond bracelet. The crystals caught the light, dancing across the walls like a mocking celebration. A collective gasp went up from the onlookers. "There, you see," Elena shouted, her voice echoing through the hall. "A common thief. I want the police called immediately. I want him in handcuffs. No one steals from the Salvatore Gala and gets away with it." Victor looked down at the jewelry in the guard's hand and then back at Elena. He didn't look like a defeated man. If anything, he looked like a scientist watching a predictable chemical reaction. "And so the trap is sprung," Victor said softly, his voice cutting through Elena's noise. "Now let us see who is truly caught in it. Take him to the security office," Elena ordered, ignoring Victor's words as she turned to address the crowd, playing the victim to perfection. "And someone get me a glass of water. The stress of this is simply too much." Andre's hand tightened around Victor's upper arm, his grip firm but not yet aggressive. The weight of the diamond bracelet sat heavily in the guard's other palm, its sparkle feeling like an indictment in the dim light of the hallway. Elena stood back, her chest heaving with a mixture of adrenaline and manufactured outrage, her eyes darting toward the onlookers to ensure her performance was being witnessed. "Come with me, sir," Andre commanded, his voice dropping into a low, professional drone designed to minimize a scene. "We'll wait for the authorities in the security office." Victor didn't pull away, but he didn't move either. He stood with a centered gravity that seemed to anchor him to the marble floor. "For what reason exactly am I being detained, Andre?" he asked, his voice steady and devoid of the tremors one would expect from a man caught in a felony. "The young lady accuses you of stealing her jewelry," Andre replied, gesturing to the bracelet. "And since we just found it in your apron, I have no choice but to hold you." Victor looked down at the hand on his arm and then back up at the guard. "And is that the extent of your professional procedure? A single accusation and a piece of evidence you didn't see me take." Elena stepped forward, her heels clicking like a countdown. "Don't listen to his lawyer talk. You found the item on him. That's all the procedure you need." "On the contrary," Victor said, his gaze shifting to the black dome of a security camera mounted near the molding. "If you're going to sit here and accuse me of this without even bothering to check the surveillance first, then tomorrow you could just as easily accuse anyone else here. Simply following a direct order from a superior doesn't change the quality of one's judgment, Andre." The guard flickered, a momentary shadow of doubt crossing his face. He looked at the camera and then back at the calm, elderly man. "Did you actually take the time to hear my side of the story before you labeled me a thief?" Victor continued, his tone instructional rather than defensive. "Or did you decide to stop me because of appearances? Because I am dressed in this apron and she is dressed in red?" "He's stalling," Elena hissed, her finger trembling as she pointed toward the hallway. "Andre, do your job. Take him away before the guests arrive and see this mess." "I am requesting the proper procedures," Victor insisted, his voice cutting through Elena's noise with surgical precision. "Check the cameras, Andre. Check them before you physically put your hands on me or call the police. If you find footage of me taking that bracelet, I will go quietly. But if you don't, you are currently participating in a very public act of defamation." Andre looked at the bracelet and then at the manager, who was now becoming visibly agitated. The standard protocol for a high-end venue like the Salvatore Gala required a clear chain of evidence, and the old man's unnerving composure was making the guard's open and shut case feel increasingly fragile. "Stay here," Andre said, finally loosening his grip on Victor's arm. "Don't move. I'm going to radio the control room and have them pull the last 10 minutes of this hallway's feed." Elena's face paled for a fraction of a second, her eyes cutting toward Marco, who was still frozen against a pillar in the distance. "That's unnecessary. The evidence is right there in your hand. If he's a thief, the cameras will prove it, ma'am," Andre replied, his voice becoming more cautious. "It's for the protection of the venue." Victor adjusted his apron, smoothing the fabric where the guard had gripped him. "A wise choice," he said softly. In real life, Elena, heroic speeches and false accusations almost never win when the light of truth is finally turned on. The heavy glass doors of the grand entrance swung open, and Damaris Salvatore swept into the lobby, her presence immediately shifting the air in the room. She was the image of high-stakes authority, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that commanded respect, but her eyes were darting toward her phone with a flicker of uncharacteristic anxiety. She didn't notice the tension radiating from the hallway or the small crowd gathered near the security office. Her mind was miles away, anchored to a man who wasn't answering his calls. "Good morning, engineer," Elena called out, her voice shifting instantly from a screech to a polished, syrupy trill as she hurried toward the boss. She stepped in front of the view of the hallway, effectively shielding the sight of the detained thief and the hovering security guard. "You're early and everything is moving right along. We've had a small, administrative hiccup, but I've already resolved it." Damaris barely looked at her, her thumb tapping rhythmically against the side of her phone. "Has he arrived yet, Elena? I've been calling him for an hour. His phone goes straight to voicemail, and he's never late for these things." "No one of importance has arrived yet, ma'am," Elena replied smoothly, a triumphant glint in her eyes as she glanced back at Victor, who remained standing in the shadow of the corridor. "Just the usual staff and a few vendors. Perhaps he's just held up in traffic." "He isn't in traffic," Damaris muttered, her worry deepening into a sharp, focused frown. "He was supposed to bring the specialty cakes himself. It's his favorite part of the event. He says it keeps him grounded." She finally looked up, her gaze scanning the lobby with a professional intensity that made Elena's smile falter.
"Wait.
Why is the security team gathered in the service hall? And why is Marco Ruiz standing there looking like he's seen a ghost?" Elena stepped closer, her tone lowering into a conspiratorial whisper. "It's nothing you need to be concerned with on your big day, engineer. We caught a local delivery man trying to make off with some jewelry. A common thief, really. He's being processed as we speak." Damaris sighed, rubbing her temples. The stress of the missing guest of honor was making the news of a petty crime feel like an unnecessary weight. A thief? On today of all days? Just ensure the police handle it quietly. I don't want the guests arriving to a crime scene. Exactly my thought, Elena said, her confidence surging as she felt she had successfully steered the boss away from the truth. "I've told the guard to be discreet. Once the police arrive, he'll be gone, and we can focus entirely on your father's celebration." Damaris nodded absently, her eyes returning to her silent phone. "I'm going to wait in the lounge. If my father calls, or if a man matching his description arrives, likely carrying a set of wooden cake crates, let me know immediately." "Of course, engineer," Elena purred, watching as Damaris began to walk toward the private lounge. Elena turned back toward the hallway, her face hardening into a mask of cold victory. She had 5 minutes to get Victor out of the building before the daughter he was so desperately trying to surprise realized he was already there, standing in the center of her own security net. Elena didn't see Victor's calm expression as he watched his daughter walk away, nor did she notice that the old man was no longer looking at the guard, but directly at her, with the pity of a man who knew exactly how high the fall was going to be. The air in the manager's back office was stifling, smelling of stale coffee and the sharp, metallic scent of Elena's perfume. She had pulled Marco inside, slamming the door with a finality that made the frames on the wall rattle. Outside, the lobby was a stage set for a grand celebration, but in here, the shadows were long and the intent was predatory. Elena didn't sit. She leaned over her desk, her red blazer vibrant and aggressive in the dim light. "You look like you're about to faint, Marco," Elena said, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous silk. "Pull yourself together. The hard part is over." The bracelet is in his pocket, and Andre is waiting for the word to call the precinct. Marco leaned against the door, his hands shoved deep into his pockets to hide their trembling. The cameras, Elena. Victor told the guard to check the cameras. If they look at the footage, they'll see me. They'll see exactly what I did. Elena let out a short, dismissive laugh and reached into her desk drawer. She pulled out a thick, white envelope and tossed it onto the mahogany surface. It landed with a heavy thud. The cameras malfunction all the time, Marco. A glitch in the server. A loose wire. I've already spoken to the technician. By the time anyone thinks to look, those 10 minutes will be a blur of static. She pushed the envelope toward him. This is $5,000. Consider it a down payment on your loyalty. Marco stared at the envelope as if it were a coiled snake. I don't want your money, Elena. I want to know why we're doing this to an old man who just wanted $50 for a cake. Because he challenged the hierarchy. Elena snapped, her composure cracking for a split second. If I let a baker talk to me like that, what's next? The janitor? The valets? This is about order. And you, Marco, are about to move up in that order. She stood tall, smoothing her hair. The board has been looking for a new senior operations manager. It's a 60% raise, a company car, and a corner office. I've already written the recommendation. All I need is for you to walk out there and tell the police that you saw him reach for her bag. You're asking me to commit perjury, Marco whispered, the weight of the bribe feeling like an anchor around his neck. To send an innocent man to jail for a promotion? I'm asking you to choose a side, Elena corrected him, her eyes narrowing. In real life, people like Victor are just background noise. People like us, we make the music. If you stand by me, you're set for life. If you hesitate, you go down with him. I'll tell Damaris that you were his accomplice, that you tried to split the profit with him. Who do you think she'll believe? Her star manager or the boy who's been stumbling over his own feet all morning? She stepped around the desk, placing a hand on his shoulder. It was meant to be comforting, but it felt like a brand. Take the money, Marco. Go to the security office, give your statement, and tomorrow, we'll start your training for the senior role. It's a small price to pay for a future. Marco looked from the envelope to Elena's expectant, cold face. He thought of the cake man standing in the hall with that unnerving, peaceful stillness. He thought of Victor's warning about betraying core values. The money on the desk represented every debt he owed, every worry he had for his mother's care, and every dream of a better life. But as he reached out and slowly picked up the envelope, he felt a hollow coldness spread through his chest. He wasn't just taking a bribe. He was sealing a fate he wasn't sure he could live with. Go, Elena whispered, a triumphant smirk finally settling on her lips. Make the call, Marco. End this. The hallway was filled with the rhythmic, heavy thud of boots on marble as Officer Ortega led Victor toward the exit. Victor's hands were held behind his back, and though his expression remained serene, the heavy canvas of his baker's apron was wrinkled where the officer had gripped him. Behind them, Elena walked with a triumphant, measured stride, her red blazer vibrant against the muted tones of the corridor as she prepared to witness the final removal of the nuisance who had dared to challenge her. Keep moving, sir, Ortega muttered, his voice devoid of malice but firm in its adherence to the story he had been told. We can discuss the details of the bracelet at the station. The details are already visible to anyone who chooses to look, officer. Victor replied softly, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Though I suspect the most important witness is standing right behind that door. As they reached the junction leading to the private lounge, the double doors swung open. Damaris Salvatore stepped out, her phone finally tucked away, her face etched with a combination of exhaustion and growing dread. She stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes widening as they landed on the scene in front of her. A uniformed officer, her manager, and a man in a flour-dusted apron being led away in disgrace. What is going on here? Damaris demanded, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Elena, I told you to handle the vendor issue quietly. Why is there an officer in my lobby? Elena stepped forward, her face a mask of sympathetic concern. I am so sorry you had to see this, engineer. This is the thief I mentioned earlier. He tried to make off with a diamond bracelet, and we found it right in his pocket. She gestured dismissively toward Victor. He's been causing trouble all morning, raising his voice and making scenes. Victor slowly turned his head to meet Damaris's gaze. The silence that followed was suffocating, stretching until the ambient noise of the hotel seemed to fade away.
"Dad,"
Damaris whispered, the word barely a breath. The color drained from Elena's face so quickly it was as if she had been struck. She looked from the billionaire engineer to the humble cake seller, her mouth hanging open in a silent, jagged line. Officer Ortega, sensing the immediate shift in the room's gravity, instinctively loosened his grip on Victor's arm. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten I was coming, Alejandra," Victor said, using the name only he used for her. He looked down at his restrained hands and then back at his daughter. "Though I didn't expect the welcoming committee to be quite this formal." "Dad, what? Why are you in handcuffs? What is she talking about?" Damaris stepped forward, her shock turning into a cold, vibrating fury as she looked at Elena. "This man is your father?" Elena stammered, her voice reaching a panicked, high-pitched frequency. I didn't know. He was dressed like a delivery man. He was arguing about the price of the cakes." "The price of the cakes was $50, Elena," Victor said, his voice now carrying the weight of the man who owned the very ground they stood on. "You tried to pay 20, and when I refused to be cheated, you decided to make me a criminal instead." He turned his gaze to Marco, who was standing in the shadows of the doorway, the white envelope of bribe money still clutched in his trembling hand. "Isn't that right, Marco? Tell the engineer about the plan for the bracelet." The final confrontation had arrived, and as Damaris looked from her father to her trembling manager, the power dynamic of the Salvatore empire didn't just shift, it collapsed entirely upon those who had built it on lies. The silence that followed Damaris's realization was absolute, a heavy, suffocating weight that seemed to suck the air out of the grand corridor. Elena stood frozen, her hand still raised in an accusatory point that now looked absurd and pathetic. The cake man, who she had treated as a nuisance to be discarded, stood before her with a sudden, undeniable aura of authority that no apron could hide. "Dad, I was looking everywhere for you," Damaris said, her voice trembling with a mixture of relief and mounting rage as she stepped toward Victor. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she signaled for Officer Ortega to step away. "Why didn't you answer my calls? Why are you being treated like this in my own house?" Victor adjusted his apron, the simple movement carrying the weight of a king straightening his robes. "My phone broke earlier, Alejandra," he said softly, his eyes never leaving Elena's pale face. "But perhaps it was a blessing. It allowed me to see exactly how your guests and your staff are treated when they don't look like they belong here." "Engineer, I can explain," Elena stammered, her voice thin and desperate. "He came in with the cakes, and he started raising his voice about the payment. I didn't know he was your father. I thought he was just a vendor causing a disturbance." "You didn't know he was my father, so you thought it was acceptable to frame him?" Damaris turned on her manager, her eyes flashing with a cold, Salvatore fury. "You knew he was a human being, Elena. That should have been enough." The onlookers, once eager to witness a scandal, now pulled back in a wave of collective realization. The man they had whispered about, the thief they had judged for his flour-dusted clothes, was Victor Salvatore, the founder of the very legacy they were here to celebrate. He was the man who had built empires from nothing, a billionaire who chose to spend his days baking cakes simply because he refused to let his soul grow idle. Victor looked toward Marco, who was still standing in the shadows, the white envelope of bribe money feeling like a leaden weight in his hand. "Marco, come here," Victor commanded, not with anger, but with a firm expectation of truth. Marco stepped into the light, his face ashen. He looked at the powerful woman in the charcoal suit and then at the man he had almost sent to jail. "Tell her, Marco," Victor said quietly. "Tell her about the bracelet. Tell her about the promotion she offered you to ensure an innocent man never walked free again." Elena let out a sharp, jagged breath. "He's lying. Marco is the one who took it. I saw him." But the lie had no air left to breathe. Marco looked at the envelope in his hand and then at Victor, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. The young man finally understood that his job was already gone the moment he agreed to the lie, The only thing left to save was his character. "She made me do it, Miss Salvatore," Marco whispered, the words rushing out in a flood of shame. "She told me she'd fire me if I didn't plant the bracelet on him. She gave me this money to keep me quiet." The room went silent again as Marco held out the envelope. The truth was no longer a matter of debate. It was an undeniable presence in the room, stripping away Elena's red blazer and her title until she was left with nothing but her own cruelty. The billionaire reveal was complete, and the cost of prejudice was about to be paid in full. The atmosphere in the grand corridor shifted from shock to a cold, clinical finality. Damaris Salvatore stood with her back straight, her silhouette casting a long shadow over Elena, who seemed to shrink within the vibrant red of her blazer. The hum of the hotel's ventilation was the only sound as Damaris took the envelope of cash from Marco's hand, her eyes never leaving her manager's face. "You are going to send 2 innocent men to jail for the sake of your own ego," Damaris said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "You didn't just fail this company, Elena. You failed every standard of human decency I expect from my staff." Elena's mouth opened, but no words came out. The polished facade of the high-end manager had completely disintegrated, leaving behind only the frantic desperation of a caught predator. "It was a misunderstanding, engineer," she finally stammered, her voice cracking. "I was trying to protect the venue's reputation. I thought." "You thought you could decide who was worthy of respect based on the clothes they wore," Victor interrupted, his voice calm and resonant as he stepped forward. He looked at the shimmering diamond bracelet still held by Officer Ortega. "You used a symbol of wealth to try and destroy a man you perceived as poor. That is not a misunderstanding, Elena. That is prejudice." Damaris turned to Officer Ortega, her expression resolute. "Officer, I believe you have all the evidence you need. Not of a theft by my father, but of a conspiracy to commit a crime by Ms. Cruz." "I understand, ma'am," Ortega replied, his grip shifting from Victor to Elena's arm. "We'll need statements from the assistant manager and your father at the station later today." "Elena Cruz, you are fired, effective immediately," Damaris declared, her tone echoing the finality of a gavel. "And do not think for a moment that this ends with your termination. I will be filing a full report for defamation, attempted fraud, and the coercion of a subordinate. Escort her out." As the officer led a sobbing Elena toward the exit, the crowd of onlookers parted like a receding tide. The woman in red, who had spent the morning shouting commands and pointing fingers, was now the one being removed in disgrace. Damaris turned her attention to Marco, who remained rooted to the spot, his head bowed in shame. "And you, Marco," she said, her voice softening slightly but remaining firm. Marco looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I know, ma'am. I'll pack my things." "I should have spoken up sooner." "You should have," Victor agreed, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "But you eventually chose the truth over a bribe and a promotion. For evil to triumph, it only needs good people to do nothing. You chose to do something, even when it cost you everything." Damaris looked at her father, and then back at Marco. "Good people are always given a second chance so they can keep doing good things," she said, mirroring her father's philosophy. "You aren't fired, Marco, but you will be working directly under my supervision until I am certain your moral compass is permanently fixed. We need people who can stand up to pressure, not fold under it." A wave of relief washed over Marco's face, and he nodded vigorously. "Thank you, Miss Salvatore. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down again." Victor smiled, a warm and genuine expression that transformed the billionaire back into the humble cake seller. He picked up the specialty cake box he had defended so fiercely and offered it to his daughter. "Now, Alejandra, I believe we have a birthday to celebrate. And I promise, these cakes are worth every penny of the $500 I'm going to charge you." Damaris laughed, the tension finally leaving her shoulders as she took her father's arm. "Let's go, Dad. I think we've had enough drama for one morning." Together, they walked toward the ballroom, leaving the shadows of the hallway behind for the light of a true celebration.